Over the last month, I've been counting down my favorite horror games from generation to generation, and now it's time to talk about the 6th generation of consoles, the likes of the Gamecube, the Xbox, the Dreamcast, and of course, the PlayStation 2. This was honestly the hardest list to put together of all of them, as there's so many memorable and great horror games from this generation of consoles, so I couldn't include them all, but trust me, I honestly could have probably made a top 20 or 30 and still have honorable mentions to throw in. So without further ado though, here are the 10 best, my personal favorite horror games of the 6th generation. Kicking off this list is Kuon, a game I don't think a lot of people played. You play as shrine maidens and exorcists. It's a feudal Japan-like setting. You even have some magic thrown in here and there, but it's very at its core a survival horror game. There's some really creepy moments. It has some absolutely great atmosphere. Has some awesome sound design as well. This is one you want to play with headphones or have a surround system around you as you're playing it. It takes place through multiple phases with multiple main playable characters throughout and a good story that ties everything together. If you get a chance to, it's a little hard to track down, but if you can get it, you should definitely check out Kuon. One of the absolute hidden gems of the Xbox is Call of Cthulhu Dark Corners of the Earth, survival horror game that of course is based on H.P. Lovecraft, and it is absolutely soaked to the brim with that mythos. If you're a fan of that, you need to check this game out. It has some stealth elements where you need to run away, some first-person shooter elements, and it is an extremely tough game to actually complete. But it has a great story and a nice little twist on everything at the end to pull everything together to make Call of Cthulhu Dark Corners of the Earth definitely worth checking out. While vastly different from its predecessors, Clock Tower 3 was still a fun survival horror game, especially during the early days of the PlayStation 2. You now have direct control over your main character. There was multiple monsters and antagonists trying to take you down. The panic meter definitely takes a bit to get used to, as you are completely vulnerable in panic mode and can die in a single hit, and the combat was reserved only really for the boss encounters, but overall Clock Tower 3 is still a very enjoyable horror experience. One of my favorites from the Dreamcast is Illbleed, with its campiness, cheesy dialogue, some horror tropes with its characters, but multiple playable ones, and the whole factor of going slow through the horror amusement park while watching out for traps everywhere. The setting and the campiness drew me in, and it's one of the reasons I still love Illbleed. One of the best launch titles on the Gamecube, Luigis Mansion. With its horror mansion setting and getting to play as Luigi being a nice novelty, you go around the mansion and of course suck up ghosts with a vacuum cleaner. Along with just trying to figure out how to draw each and every one of these ghosts out in all the rooms was one of the funnest aspects. It's a short experience, but Luigi's Mansion is definitely one of my favorite the Gamecube ever had to offer. One of the more unique horror experiences of this generation was Fatal Frame, and Fatal Frame 2 is my personal favorite of the series. I like the story aspect with the twin sisters, as well as just, of course, the core gameplay, using a camera to take on ghosts. Plenty of jump scares end up happening throughout this game, and is one of the main reasons why I found this one scarier in a lot of ways than some of the other horror games on this list. Fatal Frame may be a bit slow at times, but definitely is one series worth checking out, especially Fatal Frame 2. A bit controversial for its time, Rule of Rose has you playing as Jennifer in the 1930s. You have a faithful canine companion along with you, similar to Haunting Ground, but Rule of Rose definitely eked it out a bit for me personally. It has the creepy, scary little girl trope in masses in this game, and it's not the best playing of the survival horror, but the atmosphere and definitely the story along with it is why Rule of Rose is a personal favorite of mine. An absolute must-play for any horror fan to at least give it a try is Eternal Darkness on the Gamecube. With multiple time periods, multiple playable characters, and sometimes it leaves a bit to be desired in the action control department, but it's all about that sanity meter. This game did things that no other game I had previously played really did, with messing with you on various levels that actually was a bit jarring. I'm sure many got sucked into a few key moments, which I don't want to spoil if you don't know about it, but Eternal Darkness is an absolute must for horror fans. This spot was near impossible to decide because of my rule of only one game per franchise per list. I'm gonna go with Resident Evil 4 here, but honestly, it's really tough to pick over Code Veronica or Resident Evil Remastered. This game changed Resident Evil, sometimes for the worse in many regards, but it's still one of the funnest action horror experiences that has ever come out. Even the games coming later couldn't perfect exactly what RE4 was able to accomplish. It's a game that I still go back to and have bought and replayed on every single system that it has been released for. Resident Evil 4 is an all-time classic, and if you've never checked it out, you definitely need to do so. Before we get to number one, a couple of honorable mentions, and like I said, I could have put a lot of games here. These are just a couple that I want to make sure I did cover a little bit in this video. First up is Obscure, a game that is pretty obscure. It has a pretty campy horror presence to it, with teenage tropes for its main characters, but what makes the game stand out, especially back then, was the fact you can actually play it multiplayer with multiple playable characters at your disposal. It's not the best playing game, but definitely brought something to the table that other horror games of the time weren't doing. Definitely a game that was ambitious for its time. D2, the follow-up to D, was not a cinematic game, it was much more of a traditional survival horror, but it had so much going into it with a lot of mechanics that just weren't quite refined for that era. It has a very interesting, but also at times convoluted and overdone story, but overall D2 is one for the Dreamcast that's worth seeking out if you've never given it a shot. A very lighthearted but fun experience, Stubbs the Zombie has you playing as a zombie named Stubbs. It has a 1950s setting to it and has a lot of comedic moments to it, but just enough of the horror in it to make it a very fun game. It may be a bit hard to get a hold of now, but if you can get it, definitely check out Stubbs the Zombie. When I'm asked what is the best horror game ever, the one I go to is Silent Hill 2. I like the original Silent Hill, and I really do love Silent Hill 3, but Silent Hill 2 is almost perfect to me as a horror experience. It's the story and the characters that drew me in and has stuck with me ever since I got it on launch day when it came out for the PlayStation 2. It has that spooky, scary atmosphere, but done, I think, much better than the original Silent Hill because of the limitations of the original PlayStation 1. Has some great cinematic graphics for its time, but it's just that whole lore of getting deep down into the character's psyche, and once you kind of piece together what exactly is going on, it's an absolutely great overall story. Silent Hill 2 is not only a personal favorite, it is, in my opinion, the best horror game we may ever see. So there you have it, the best horror games of the 6th generation. Of course, this is all my personal opinion, but what's your personal favorites? I may be a bit nostalgia heavy with Silent Hill 2, I fully admit that, but it's a game that had such an impact back then, has one of the best gaming soundtracks ever for me, and a game that I just played this week that still packed the same punch it did so many years ago when I first enjoyed it. That's also going to wrap up this month's worth of horror-based countdowns. I hope you've had fun with me counting down the best horror games of each generation. I plan on doing some other horror-based countdowns in the future for sure, for maybe handheld, PC, and the later generations of systems. But with that, guys, that's going to wrap up this countdown. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.